Hi, everyone.
Hello. In the last segment in this new series on the faithful and discreet slave, we highlighted David Berceau. Chose David Berceau because not only is he an exciting new discovery for us, but he represents at least my roots and Vivian's too, in that he is an ex-Jehovah's Witness. But my roots go back further than Jehovah's Witnesses. I was brought into the world and baptized Anglican, and I wish I had known the rich intellectual and spiritual tradition of Anglicanism when I was a teenager, before I stopped going to church and going to Anglican Sunday school in Toronto. If I had only known the Anglican Church had such teachers as the one we're going to talk about today, Tom Wright. And Tom Wright is best known nowadays as the author of a complete series on the New Testament. And that series is kind of the successor to William Barclay's New Testament series, which has been sold in the millions all over the world and has served the English-speaking and I think some foreign language churches for decades, since the 1950s, and it's still around, and they're still very worthwhile.
Very popular still.
But Tom Wright has succeeded. By the way, he's still with us. He's 70 years old, but he's still with us and still quite healthy and very active and still writing books. He's written something like 70 books.
Over 70 books.
And many of them are in this series, a complete series now, just completed just a few years ago. This is the Luke for Everyone.
So they're called the Everyone series.
And this is one of the 2 volumes on John for Everyone. But what's surprising about Wright, even more astounding than William Barclay, who was a theologian, a New Testament commentator, I should probably more accurately call him. Barclay was a New Testament commentator, but Wright is a theologian and a New Testament commentator, and did this popular stuff after he was famous as a theologian and New Testament scholar.
So he's taught at universities for more than 20 years.
He's taught at
Oxford, Cambridge,
and McGill here in Canada.
Yeah.
And gained his fame as a theologian and New Testament commentator before he became really well known. He was known in those days as N.T. Wright.
Yeah.
It was a very scholarly name.
So these ones that are Tom Wright, I think they're just more at the level of the average person, at the level of a popular level. So they're a great addition to any library.
The reason that he's so phenomenal in a way is that not only does he have both audiences, the scholarly audience, because he was teaching at seminaries and was a bishop. I forgot to mention that. He was a bishop of the Church of England, a bishop of Durham, in the great tradition of Lightfoot, Westcott, who we all know if we're witnesses, and H.G. Moule. So there's a great tradition of scholarly New Testament scholars who became later bishops of Durham. But after he left that office in 2010, he went back to writing and speaking. So you can get a ton of him on YouTube. Yeah. I'm pleased to report.
And I think what I like about him especially is that he can, there are scholars who seem to only speak to each other. So that you might listen to them and you will certainly gain things from it, but the audience is primarily other people of scholarship.
At that level.
Yeah. So, for N.T. Wright or Tom Wright, I think he reaches, because he's very personable and it just seems...
bubbly.
Yeah, just like a grandfatherly figure to me.
He's like Michael Green in that aspect.
Yeah, he's friendly and he has got a good sense of humor. So you'll find him easy to listen to.
Just
and understand.
We thought we'd throw a few samples of his books at you. Here's one that's been a bestseller called Simply Christian: Why Christianity Makes Sense. And this one is kind of a modern version of the famous apologetics book by C.S. Lewis called Mere Christianity, where he tries to explain why Christianity is true, but also why it's different than other religions for the common man. This is what one very famous Old Testament commentator said. No, I won't read. I will read Brueggemann. Brueggemann said, this is the Old Testament commentary writer, Walter Brueggemann, American, by the way. Brueggemann said, Wright lives imaginatively at the interface of critical thought and church faith. Talking about him being a bridge builder. Mm. Readers will welcome such ready access to one of the fine teachers of the church. And James Packer, who is very conservative Anglican theologian who taught in England and Regent College in Canada, Packer says about Wright, brilliant Bishop Wright is one of God's best gifts to our decaying Western church. Mm. And would-be learners and teachers of the faith will gain hugely from these fascinating pages. And I thought, what's astounding about that, if you're a Jehovah's Witness or an ex?
Yeah, is the ability to be aware. They're very honest. To be able to self-criticize your own people.
Can you imagine a Jehovah's Witness governing body member saying, our decaying one true religion? Yeah, no, they would never do that. So I think this resembles the prophets. The prophets serve a purpose. They criticize their own people and try and correct the way. Well, the church does that. So there's built-in accountability as well as capacity for self-criticism in the way way Christianity is unfolding in the real world outside the cults. Mm-hmm. Christianity has the capacity, hard-earned, after centuries of conflict among the denominations. It's a hard-earned accountability. Mm-hmm. And you see it very plainly in the books at the seminary and university level. This is another one that I think would probably appeal to witnesses, ex-witnesses. Surprised by Hope. And because he is talking about, the subtitle here is Rethinking Heaven, the Resurrection, and the Mission of the Church. So he's going to be talking about some of the very issues that ex-witnesses are constantly wondering about when it comes to when you leave the watchtower. What's your hope for the future? What's the purpose of the earth, and what's going to happen to it? Well, he addresses all these things. Yeah. And you'd be maybe surprised I think to find out what he says. Now, there's a few good blurbs on the back here as well. Richard Foster, who wrote Celebration of Discipline. I don't know how many ex-witnesses would be familiar with it, but the church is very familiar with this work. It was quite popular. He says, I heartily commend to you Surprised by Hope. Without compromise or apology, Wright lays out a bold and vigorous articulation of the blessed hope of the Christian witness. Grappling with a vast array of controversial topics, this book is sure to surprise you and will no doubt fill you with hope. And then Brueggemann also does a blurb on the back of this one. Wright brings his enormous erudition of the most urgent contemporary question, the cluster of issues around the future and hope and resurrection and life in the kingdom. The outcome is an accessible, reliable, and thoughtful reflection that will greatly clarify and reassure. Brueggemann was the Old Testament scholar. Mm-hmm. We mentioned slightly that Wright came to fame with his scholarly books, and those scholarly books that made him become, for instance, what do they call it, canon theologian of Westminster Cathedral? Yeah, Westminster Abbey. Westminster Abbey. Well, that's the most famous cathedral, although it's not technically that, I don't think, in England. And the fact that he was given that status in the early 2000s showed his esteem in the scholarly world as well as the social world of England. But he gained his fame talking on three large subjects. One of them was the kingdom. One of his I think a couple of his works from the 80s and 90s are on that theme. He wrote popular books during that period, but he wrote on the kingdom a lot and its relation to the nation of Israel, for instance. But he did a popular version of that too, which is this one. He reduced his arguments to the popular level for the rest of us, the non-scholars, and it was called How God Became King, the forgotten story of the Gospels. So what you notice as a Jehovah's Witness, that the Gospels, at least 3 of them anyway, not the 4th, interestingly, but the synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, are full of this preaching of the kingdom. So what do we do with that if you're a Christian? Well, Wright tells you what to do with it in a far more subtle and, I think, elaborate and accurate way than the Watchtower does. What do you do, for instance, with the fact that the kingdom is not the subject of the Gospel of John? Now, that's another video or two. But Wright reduced his scholarly work to this popular book, so all of us can benefit by the points of view. He also did the same with his studies of Paul. He's done a popular life of Paul, but he's also done these massive books on Paul's thought and influence in theology. And just lately he's written a magisterial book on the resurrection, which we haven't obtained yet. But it's said to be if not the greatest book ever written, covering the issues of the resurrection of Christ.
So if you just want to get a sample, though, of the man and how he speaks, there's lots of things you can find on YouTube. Interviews with him, some of them are short little interviews on given topics, but also you can hear him lecturing. Yeah, but he's always a joy to listen to. Very
accessible, at least in YouTube form.
So we'll try and provide a link, right?
We'll put 1 or 2 links in the description anyway. And we'll try to figure out a way with Max's help to put links right on our videos to be explored in the future. So we hope you will benefit from Tom Wright's ministry in the same way we have. Till next time.